With Creative Assembly in deep waters and the Total War series in rather chaotic times, is it possible that Paradox will swoop in and pick up the pieces in one way or another? Well, that question might be answered in several ways depending on what we mean by picking up the pieces. Let's deal with the most obvious one, but also the one least likely to happen, namely that Paradox just straight up buys Creative Assembly. First of all, Creative Assembly is owned by Sega, its publisher, and from what we know, CA remains one of Sega's most profitable studios. Creative Assembly might be facing difficult times right now, especially with the cancelling of Hyenas, which seems to have set them back a few dozen $million, and of course the poor performance of Total War Pharaoh, the latest game in the series, which has been received almost exclusively in a negative light. And this doesn't even include the unfortunate PR blunders which have happened on the Steam forums and in PR statements, or the layoffs that have occurred in the aftermath of all of this. According to leaks, reports, and sales figures, Creative Assembly does remain a highly profitable company though, and is actually one of Sega's most reliable earners, especially in the West. In other words, it seems highly unlikely that Sega would allow one of its most profitable companies to be sold anytime soon, especially when Creative Assembly is likely hard at work with unannounced titles which are set to make up for the losses incurred by the Hyenas cancellation. Consider also the fact that Paradox does not have all the money in the world. And even though it's also a publishing company, Paradox works on multiple games at the same time, which all demand costs related to them. Buying a company like Creative Assembly, which likely would be valued very highly, is therefore very unlikely and not really worth entertaining, I think, which is why I spent some time explaining the situation here first. Although if it happens, I'll gladly eat my words. And that leads us to the most interesting idea, namely that Paradox actually takes the big leap and attempts to create an actual Total War competitor. So how likely is this? Well, there are several reasons why this might happen, and a few factors to consider. The first is that Paradox is arguably the world's leading strategy game developer, and importantly, publisher. Paradox owns and develops a number of highly successful franchises, from Crusader Kings to Europa Universalis, Hearts of Iron, Victoria, and Stellaris. And who could forget about Imperator Rome? Paradox has a track record of creating franchises that don't just break even, and in the genre they call forever games, meaning games that receive content updates and support for years, and which are profitable due to receiving paid DLCs for up to more than a decade, as is the case for EU4. In the past 10 years, Paradox has made games that feature mostly every time period in recorded history, admittedly focusing on Europe and the Near East for the vast majority of them. For the most part, they've gone to greater lengths than any other developer out there, with each of these series being known for their complexity and depth, while still remaining more approachable than the most niche series out there. The reason why I'm saying this really is to set you up. As much success as Paradox has had, it's evident that the series has focused on one thing and mainly one thing only: the campaign experience and making it as diverse and immersive as possible. I mean, if there is one thing players have been wanting from Total War games for, I guess, forever, it really is that deeper sense of campaign mechanics and a focus on historical depth and authenticity. It really doesn't get any more poignant when, as I recently learned from Shad back in July 2006, this has been the case ever since the ancient times, when this legend let the world know how Rome Total War was a big step back from Medieval 1, and how Paradox games, namely Hearts of Iron 2 and EU3, felt and looked like much better and deeper alternatives. Notice in particular the last main sentence here, which really cracked me up. And he's talking about Medieval 2 here, by the way, will be an expansion of Rome Total War where the depth, playability, and tactical battlefield simulation will be further diluted in favor of massive graphical battles. Now, I won't say he is wrong, but it's kind of fun and paradoxical, if you will, that Rome and Medieval 2, the two games generally seen as the best in the series, were given, by some, the same criticism we see towards the later Total War games today. Either way, while campaign depth has been Paradox's strong suit, there remains one space they have never truly penetrated, and that is the real-time Battlefield space. It comes as a surprise to no one, I bet, since this is the main point of discussion when talking about modern strategy games. How do we combine the best of Paradox with the best of Total War? It's no secret that Creative Assembly has the market completely cornered, but it remains as such only because no one with serious financial muscle has tried to make incursions. So would Paradox try to enter the Total War space and offer their signature complex campaigns and Total War-like battles? These signs pointing toward this happening are here, and they're quite promising actually. If we look at Paradox's strategy portfolio, it's clear that they wish to spread out and cover as much ground as possible. Their staple series all point to this, meaning that they want to offer the cornerstone titles of each historical period. But more than their biggest series, look at what's happened in the past. Almost 9 years ago, Paradox published City Skylines, a city builder that sought and pretty much managed to become the defining game in the genre. Now, city builders is a different breed from grand strategy, but it remains a subgenre of it after all, so it does make sense. What's more is that Paradox has slowly but surely moved quite strongly into the more traditional 4X genre. While I would consider Stellaris a blend of 4X and grand strategy, Age of Wonders is much more classically 4X. And the big news here is of course that Paradox announced Millennia, a direct competitor to the Civilization games, which pretty much defines its cornerstone of the strategy genre. In other words, with Paradox moving to conquer ever more sectors of what can be considered strategy gaming, including grand strategy, 4X, and city builders, I really don't think it would be too far-fetched to believe that they've thought about making a Total War-like in recent years. The main reason why it hasn't happened yet, in my opinion, probably comes down to cost. Contrary to these other games which are largely or only campaign-based, and in a space where visual fidelity hasn't really been a thing before Paradox stepped it up with EU4, Total War games cost a ton of money to make and require different types of expertise. For one, battle AI, tactical choices that make gameplay and historical sense, and completely new 3D models and assets would need to be made on a whole different scale than Paradox has ever attempted before. The question is where this expertise would come from. When Paradox decided to axe Imperator Rome, they moved much of the team to Hearts of Iron 4 to develop DLC, and when Paradox created Paradox Tinto led by Johan, it also did so to have a dedicated support and DLC team for EU4. In other words, we might just have a part of Paradox right now that are working on a grand new game somewhere. But I think since the company relies on moving people around so much, it might indicate that Paradox itself is busy supporting and developing their core games. After all, Millennia isn't made by Paradox Development Studios, but by C-Prompt Games. City Skylines similarly isn't made by PDS, but by Colossal Order, and Age of Wonders is developed by Triumph Studios, none of which are developed by Paradox internally, but rather published by Paradox Interactive as a parent company. In other words, when Paradox has taken this step away from their grand strategy niche, it's mostly been through new developers in other studios. The question then is whether Paradox has the manpower to pull off a Total War-like by itself, or if it would need to go on a hiring spree to accomplish it. And hiring people costs money of course, but what probably costs more is the development of an engine or a modified engine of Clausewitz, which can support the admittedly immense demand of what Total War actually offers. We must remember that Total War games are unique for a reason, and that by now, any game that tries to go up against that series will inevitably be heavily judged and compared to Total War, which by now has more than 20 years of expertise in making Total War games. So while Paradox might be able to make something like Total War, the potential risk of failing or being seen as inferior or taking important missteps is likely a factor when considering whether to create a game like that or not. No matter the risks though, I think most of what Paradox would need to do to truly succeed here would be to focus on creating battles that feel fresh. Now that's not a small ask at all, but consider what they already have, which is what a lot of Total War players are asking for. Virtually every overhaul mod out there focus on making Total War campaigns deeper, often explicitly citing Paradox as their benchmark for what they're aiming for. Indeed, modders have independently been able to create a unification mod between Crusader Kings 3 and Total War Attila, meaning you can play CK3's campaign but fight each individual battle simulated on Attila's battlefields. It's a fantastic effort and an incredible achievement on its own, but of course, it would be a big game changer if Paradox itself offered those battles natively in the engine. I'm also convinced that a large part of the Total War community would welcome a new spin on these large historical battles. Just look at the interest towards a game like Manor Lords, a tiny indie studio that are explicitly making clear that the battles in that game will be realistically small, but feature important use of tactics and the like. If a one-man studio with some backing can do it, so can Paradox. It just takes willpower and commitment, and a fair bit of cash of course. At the end of the day, it's quite baffling that no studio has reliably and successfully attempted to enter the Total War subgenre of strategy. We've had a few one-offs, but not really successful ones or near the same scale. Honestly, I think developers might be a bit frightened by the current modern-day Total War level of visual fidelity, and that this might be putting people off. But the fact is that you really don't need groundbreaking visuals to pull a game like this off in my opinion. As long as a competitor could deliver visuals that compete with the likes of Rome Remastered, but with better animations, or even Empire Total War, which still looks phenomenal 14 years later, I'm sure it would be praised for looking great. But honestly, not even that level is fully needed as long as it looks charming and nails its own vibe and atmosphere. as long as it's fun to play. At the end of the day, fun is what matters. And I think, for a series that hasn't really innovated in the historical strategy space since frankly Empire in 2009, that Paradox would be poised to do really well if they gave themselves the chance. What I do know at least is that the Total War community would embrace their attempt with open arms, just like they eagerly await Manor Lords, which isn't even a grand strategy game. But what do you think? Will Paradox enter the Total War genre one way or another, or is it too big of a risk and project to hope for? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and remember to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers!